Hello, good evening, and welcome to another session of Friday Conversations. Really good to be with you this evening. Thank you for joining us. I'm joined by Alan Hammond, who's going to be having a chat with me tonight. I'm looking forward to it. My name's Matt, and we are part of the King's Church here in Wisbech. And wherever you're watching from, you're more than welcome joining us this evening. Friday Conversations is an opportunity for us to have a chat in a socially distanced way. We've got this lovely screen in between us to enable us to have a chat on the live stream like this. But it's not just a conversation between Alan and myself. I've got my phone here. I'm logged into the YouTube live chat as well. So please do put your questions to Alan in there as well. I can see people already chatting about cats and all sorts of stuff. And there's already a couple of questions being posed already, even before we've begun. So thank you, Keith, for putting those in. It's Keith's fault. And so yes, good evening to everyone who's joining us on live chat and everyone who's not chatting but is with us or indeed is watching on catch up. So thank you so much for joining us. So Alan is with us this evening, and part of his background is as a police officer, so we'll be talking about that. And the whole series at the moment is Faith in Action. So we'll be asking a bit about Alan's life, Alan's faith, and also how that kind of worked out for him in more sort of practical, everyday kind of ways. So it'll be a good conversation. I'm looking forward to it.
So am I.
So let us make a start then. You sent me loads of information.
I did. I didn't want you to be uninformed.
I'm very well informed. I'm just trying to find a good place to start. Should we just start then by just asking, what's your story? How did you come to faith in Jesus?
I brought up by my mother. Mum was a Christian, as far back as I can remember. My consciousness of being a Christian was probably when we lived in Singapore. I was 6 to 8 years of age. At that time, I can remember a lot of. It was very striking because it was very different to where I had lived before. But I know that Mum went to an Anglican fellowship there. Dad didn't. Dad was a serving soldier in the army. Mum went along to a fellowship there. I was too young. But when we came back in 1954, I think, I was 8 years of age. We lived briefly in the countryside near Huntingdonshire, and then in London, and she started going to a church fellowship there. It was like an Anglican church. It was very high. There's some aspects of it that didn't appeal to me as a 9-year-old, but I did get involved with the local cub group there. Later on, Mum and Dad moved to an army house in Bushey in Hertfordshire. There was no church there because it was just too far. Mum and Dad didn't have a car, and there was nowhere anywhere nearby. But when they moved again later, they bought a house in 1958 in a little place called Bricketwood, halfway between Watford and St Albans. There was a lovely, low Anglican fellowship there. It was a daughter church of the parish church, which was about 5 miles away. But it was very, very relaxed, and she went there. And when I became a teenager, she eventually persuaded me to go along. She tried before, but I was a little bit reluctant. And one day she said to me, Alan, she knew I liked trains and railways. She said, Alan, there's a chap been along to one of the meetings and he was talking about model railways. Why don't you come along? So I thought, great, I'll give it a go. And of course, I went along, I thoroughly enjoyed it. Never ever saw a model railway man again. But it was lovely, and the fellowship was very warm. There were boys and girls there. I got involved with the fellowship there. And around 1960, went off to a Christian camp, 2 years running on the Isle of Wight. And I began to become more consciously aware of Jesus, God, the Bible, and things like that. By around 18 years of age, I'd met Joan by this time, and we were going actively to things like Billy Graham crusades. Now, you were talking about Billy Graham last week, weren't you?
I was, yeah.
And we gave our lives to the Lord at a Billy Graham concert, convention, when we were called forward at the end. Both of us went forward and made that conscious decision to make Jesus central in our lives. And my faith was tested immediately, because as we left to go back outside and get in the car that we'd driven there in, somebody had broken into the car and stolen the car radio.
Oh.
So already your faith is being tested, but that was the start for us.
Yeah.
Back at 18 years of age, 19 years of age, somewhere around then.
Great. Yeah, really good. Billy Graham, a fascinating.
He was, and I read quite a few of his books, and he was a very charismatic individual.
Yes.
Very easy to follow and understand.
I don't. Have you watched the series The Crown on Netflix?
Jones watched a few, and I sort of watched out of my eye. But
okay.
It's not my forte.
There's one
really.
episode in particular where it focused on Billy Graham when he came to the UK.
Okay.
And sort of his crusade and things, and how the Queen called him over for tea a couple of times, and they had conversations, and it was very interesting. Very interesting.
Mm-hmm.
So model railways have been a passion of yours for a while.
Amongst all my life really. Trains since I was about 4 years of age.
Okay.
But I keep it quiet normally. It's a harmless pastime.
Yeah, nice, good. So, Keith, we'll go to one of Keith's questions. He wants to know, why did you become a police officer?
Okay. That's interesting, because we got married in 1967 and moved immediately to a small cottage in very rural Surrey. And I was at work all day long, obviously. We found ourselves living opposite the local policeman who lived in the village police station. It was an office police station. He and his family lived on board. Joan was very young. His wife was quite young. They both had young babies, and they got chatting and talking. As of course we were invited, and I met this policeman. He made it all sound extremely exciting, and I thought various things about the occupation I had at the time that I was unhappy with. I'll give it a try. So I applied initially to Hertfordshire Police, because that's where we'd come from. They weren't recruiting, and they wrote back to me and said, sorry, we're not recruiting at the moment. So I thought, well, in that case I'll try Surrey Police, because we were living in Surrey. Surrey did accept me. The application process to go through to join the police is very lengthy. In this country, it takes 8-9 months from you making your initial application to being formally accepted and actually going off to training course. While I was waiting to go, Hertfordshire wrote back to me and said, we're recruiting now, would you like to apply? So life turns on little things like that. Yeah. But I joined Surrey Police in 8th of January 1969 as a constable, and I thoroughly enjoyed it right from the get-go.
What did you enjoy? Was it like the physical kind of
a whole raft of things? Or? There's a whole raft of things about policing, and one of the things I want to ask, and I did warn you I was going to ask you a question, and I'm going to ask the same question to the folk watching in as well, is about fundamentally why in Britain do we have a police force, and what's the role of police in society? This is a question I used to ask my trainees when I was a trainer, particularly up in North Wales, where I was training new staff coming into the control room. On day one, I'd ask them that question. I gave them 4 days to think about it, by the way. You've only got about 4 minutes. So why do we have a police force? And I'd be interested to see what people say, where we fit into society. Then I'll answer the question about how I enjoy it and how it all fits in.
Okay.
So the question's yours now.
Yeah, all right, that's fair enough. I guess the most obvious answer for me is law and order, helping to try and maintain a sense of order and peace in society. I suspect there's more to it than that.
That's why I've asked the question, of course.
Yeah. That's the thing that obviously springs to my mind. And let's just see if anyone else has commented on here. He has one: to serve and protect.
Okay.
Oh, yeah, that's Jane asking for people's feedback. Yes, serve. That's interesting. Serve.
It is.
Service.
And it is a service. And indeed, many police forces, note the word they're referred to as a force, which implies giving force. But in fact, many police services try to give the word service. Police Service of Northern Ireland, or just drop it altogether. Norfolk Constabulary, Surrey Police, Scottish police and so on and so
yeah.
forth, Metropolitan Police, they don't actually put the word force in. And in fact, what I often think about is the definition I learned 50 years ago when I joined the police service of what the role of a constable was. I can remember it, I've got it written down just in case I don't, but I remember it was drummed into me. So a constable is a citizen, first of all, locally appointed, but having authority under the Crown. And it's interesting, it's a Crown appointment.
Okay.
On the day you joined the police service, you paraded before the local magistrates' court and sworn in an oath of allegiance to the Queen. And that actually is one of the reasons why it's difficult to remove a police officer from office, because as a Crown appointment, it's not you can't just sack them.
Okay, that's interesting.
So, locally appointed, having authority under the Crown for the protection of life and property. That's at the top end. And then the preservation of the Queen's peace, which is what you've come with, and the maintenance of order, the prevention and detection of crime, and finally, the prosecution of offenders against the peace. And that comes in as the very last part of it. So the fundamental end of policing is actually about protection. And when you start to think of policing in that context, enforcement only comes at the bitter end, when people have failed to go along with whatever it is they're being asked to do.
Yeah. Which of course is a striking difference from some police forces that I've experienced before.
Well, I asked you the question before we went on air.
My life,
Yeah. And I think British police are held up around the world as being a service to admire. And it's also one of the very few police forces, of any, that's not armed.
Yes, that is a very good point.
I never wore a firearm, and I didn't actually like firearms, but as I had to give authority for firearms to be used in the role I last had in the control room. It might be something we'll come on to later on.
Yeah, yes, and I don't know about you guys, what kind of police forces you've experienced before. Let us know in the comments if you've come across or had to deal with police in other countries, and maybe some similarities or differences that you have experienced there. I mean, I'm from Zimbabwe. I've experienced the Zimbabwean police force on numerous occasions. Part of it isn't their fault, but part of it is very, very under-resourced. If a crime or something happened, you would have to go and fetch the policeman to bring them to the crime, or they would arrive 4 days later on a bicycle if you're lucky.
Oh, really?
Yeah. It's very unlikely that they'll investigate anything. I had to get my fingerprints done to do because of like a DBS check, an international one, and so when I went to the police station, well, they had no forms, they had no paper, so I had to go to the local newsagents, buy the police form that they sell at the newsagents, take it to the police station. Then they didn't have any ink, so then I had to go to a different police station who did have ink to then get that bit done. And lots of things. And my car was broken into, but that was just well, that's unfortunate for you, too bad. Well, we might give you a crime number, we might not, but that's just the way it is.
And if you're experiencing policing like that, you could have a jaundiced view, couldn't you?
You could, and especially when actually one of the reasons why I left Zimbabwe was because there was no enforcement of law, there was no peace.
No.
And it reached a stage where the police force was just completely ineffective. I mean, there were farm raids and people were getting murdered and booted off their property and all sorts of stuff going on. And the police were there, but just standing on the sideline
in effect,
and doing nothing.
I hadn't wanted to get down the road of where would we be in this country if we didn't have a police force, but that probably would give you an idea of what it might be like. Yeah,
and it's not you do not feel safe.
No.
Ever. And so for me, coming to here and experiencing a completely different way of doing things, I mean, I feel very safe, in comparison. And so I suppose that's a reflection on the way that policing's done and the seriousness behind it and everything else.
I think so. In this country, the phrase we use frequently in the service is that policing is by consent, the consent of the public. If you don't have the consent of the public, it's very, very difficult to police effectively, and clearly over their money. But you just reminded me of an amusing story when I first went to North Wales and was stationed at Rhyl, and I asked to use the photocopy machine. So we haven't got a photocopy machine here. You'd have to go to Prestatyn 4 miles away and use the photocopy there. They have moved on a bit since, but it was symptomatic of an impoverished Welsh force when I went there in 1988.
Yeah.
It wasn't not as impoverished as you were in Zimbabwe,
No.
but by comparison with Surrey.
Yes. We've got a few comments here from people responding to the why do we have a police force question. So Richard says crime prevention.
Yeah.
Maggie says to make people feel safe by enforcing laws which help society. Jackie says a non-political and non-biased organisation that upholds the rule of law for the people. Maddie says the police keep law and order to protect the vulnerable. Yeah. Keith says it's like being a good parent.
Well, there is an element of that.
Yeah. And James says policing is all about safety and crime prevention for the entire country, also to protect those who are vulnerable and looking after people with high rates of antisocial behaviour. Blah, blah, blah. Good. Oh, well, thank you very much. And we've got a few examples. I'll leave you to read the examples of police forces being encountered in other countries. So you can read them. Some of them are quite amusing. So do have a read of those if you're watching live. So part of our discussion on these Friday nights is finding out how faith can be put into action. So you became a police force because you met this friend.
I met a police officer.
Yeah.
I was enthralled by some of the things he told me.
Yeah.
He made it sound interesting, not exciting.
Yeah.
It is exciting at times, and very exciting, and very enjoyable because of that. But that's not fundamentally why you join. And even so, the excitement piles after a while anyway,
Yeah.
because you're doing the same thing. It becomes a routine almost. What to other people was exciting, and it's a one-off to you as a daily occurrence.
Yeah.
But in relation to faith, I was already a Christian when I joined, and there were occasions when things happened where I was able to put faith into place. Never outright, because that probably would have been frowned upon by. It's a very disciplined organisation, the police service. So you have to be very careful what you do and what you say and the rules you follow and so on and so forth. But there were a few occasions where I was able to use faith. And I remember at the time I was on CID, a young girl been arrested. I forget what for, but it was she'd been arrested several times. And on this particular occasion, I hadn't been involved in her arrest, but I was a detective on duty, and I was assigned to take over the case from the arresting uniformed police officers. And I went down into the cells and went into the cell to talk to this girl, and she would not say a word. She was completely enclosed, her knees were drawn up, her head was in down low. She would not speak. She would not give us anything whatsoever. So I thought, what am I going to do about this? Assigned to talk to this young girl. So I briefly prayed about it there, and then I said to the sergeant, look, I'm just going to go out. I'll be gone about 10 or 15 minutes. And I went home. And at that time we had a lovely lassie, a sheepdog, and she was all fur and wet nose and waggy tail. I thought, I'll take the dog in with me and let's see what happens. So I took the dog back to the police station, cleared it with the sergeant. So I was going to open the cell door and let this dog in. And the dog, this young woman, absolutely dissolved with the dog going into her. And she opened up completely. And I think that was the sort of thing that was of the Lord in my view. I didn't come from me. And obviously I had to interview her. And the dog went back into the car, of course. And she was very forthcoming. We dealt with her on the I forget what it was she was in for. I waited until she'd been gone through the court processes and she pleaded guilty. And once she'd been dealt with, I then said to Joan, why don't we invite this young girl around? And she came in with her boyfriend and she had afternoon tea with us on at least one occasion, possibly two. There was no attempt on my part to convert her or anything like that. I let it be known we were Christians. But my objective was to keep her from getting in trouble again. And as far as I know, I succeeded in that. We didn't keep touch with her. She lived about 6 or 7 miles away in the next division. I never ever heard of her again. So that sort of thing.
Yeah.
And another occasion, I was acting as custody sergeant in Rill, and a young fellow had come in. He'd been arrested a considerable number of times as a juvenile. He'd now got to about 18 or 19 years of age. His father was a career criminal, although he himself had become more of a drunkard and a nuisance than a petty thief. But I said to this young lad as he went into the cells, and bearing in mind the custody sergeant's not allowed to be involved in the investigation. You're completely independent, so you know why they're in custody, but you're not involved in their processes at all. I said to this young man, he was about 19 at the time, and he was clearly intelligent, and he was unusually articulate. I said, why don't you look now, at 19 years of age, you're forever getting caught, you're always in trouble, you could easily get a job and do something worthwhile. He said, thieving's the only thing I've ever known since I was a child. And my heart just went out to him. I never ever saw that young man again, and I was promoted shortly afterwards to inspector, but I've never heard him come to notice again. Now, I don't know whether my words had any effect. I hope they did. It's like the siege you were talking about last week. In both cases, I never knew what the outcomes were.
Yeah.
But I hope they were favourable for those people.
Yeah, that's right. No, that's good. Those are great stories. Do you think faith was part of motivation? Because you said you were a Christian before you became a policeman. Do you think that played a part in sort of motivating you to become a policeman?
Not necessarily motivating me to become a police officer, no, it didn't. But it did in how I dealt with things as a police officer.
Okay. Because
as a police officer, you're dealing with, not only dealing with people who are getting into trouble, you're also dealing with people who are at the receiving end of trouble. Domestic violence, the house has been broken into, they've been involved in a road accident or whatever. And you have to deal with those people as well. And you need to do that with a considerable amount of sympathy and often empathy as well. When you go into somebody's house that's been trashed because it's been burgled, or it's usually the women are the most affected, quite obviously, and all their intimate things have been thrown about, the thief will go, he knows where the people hide stuff, and that's what they aim for straight away. And they'll go into a bedroom and they'll just toss everything everywhere in order to find jewellery, is what they're normally after. And all the women want to do is clear up and tidy up. But you're thinking at the back of your head, you've got to get scenes of crime people in, crime scene investigators, who need to come in. So you've got to gently persuade these people, hold fire. I know you want to clear up, but we need to get evidence.
And then you got the other end of the coin where you're dealing with the offenders, and some would obviously be very violent and everything. But I would imagine in some cases, like some of the stories you were telling, yes, they're offenders, but they can also be extremely vulnerable and sort of
they usually
broken
are.
people.
They often are.
That you know, and you got to tread carefully there as well.
Very much so, because you are dealing with people. You are aware that fundamentally they're ordinary people, that something's gone wrong in their life that's made them commit crime. It might be like that young man I just referred to who was extreme, but for some people, they don't really have a way of life. I've certainly known shoplifters and burglars who have used their children to do the shoplifting for them, and burglars who put very small children in through very narrow windows to go and open the front door. So what hope do those children stand when they're brought up by parents like that? It could be tough. But you deal with people with empathy, and right throughout the whole of my service. I can give you an example of you mentioned violence, and yes, people often are violent when they're being arrested or where they're being detained. As one of the attacking us as one of the means of trying to get away. If you're going to be locked up and possibly go to prison for a very long while indeed, you're going to try and run away often. And but all the time, most of the people I arrested, and I've arrested a lot of people, most of them, some have put up a token resistance. Most people come in without any trouble at all, and often walk in without even being handcuffed. But I have another little story, if I may.
Yeah, please.
When I was a sergeant in Walton-on-Thames, there used to be a road traffic crew used to come in regularly to see us, and I encouraged this particular crew to come in because one of the two members was an ex-army guy. He was not just ex-army, he was ex-SAS. And there was something about this fellow. He had a presence about him that everybody knew. And he wasn't overtly aggressive or anything like that at all. He'd clearly been well taught by the army. all the arrest techniques and so on and so forth. But he never ever had any problem arresting people. Never. He had something about him that people just acquiesced and did what they were told. And so I was just encouraging him to be on there, because if we get trouble and I'm going to ask you to go and help us. And there's something about him. But also, for myself personally, I was 30 years a police officer, many of those years as an active frontline police officer in all three ranks that I served. I was never ever assaulted as a police officer, not once in 30 years, even though we were often in hostile situations. Somebody once spat at me, which was very unpleasant in itself. And luckily for me, I think it was the God here, the spittle landed on my clothing, not on my face where it was ended. He was being arrested by a number of people. I happened to be amongst the people carrying out the arrest, and that was his token effort at resistance. But for the most part, nearly everybody that I was involved with came quietly. And I wondered if that was an aura, if that was God looking after me. I've reflected on it quite a lot over the last few weeks since I was asked by Clive to come in today. That particular episode, how come I never got assaulted? I was often in hostile situations, as all policemen are. There we are.
That's good. That's good. I think, well, we're about halfway now.
Okay.
So what I think we're going to do is we're going to have a break for a song, and when we come back we'll kind of talk. We can still talk a bit more about policing, but sort of your church side and church involvement and that sort of aspect of your life as well, if we may.
No problem.
So that'll be great. Right, so we're going to watch have a song now, and we'll see you in about 3 minutes or so. Hello, welcome back. We're continuing our conversation this evening with Alan Hammond, who has joined us this evening. We've been catching up with some of the live chats and comments and things, and we see that we've been joined by Alan's daughter.
So I've just learned. Yeah.
Hello.
Hi, Sam.
Nice to have you with us. Excellent. We might be coming back to some police stuff in a minute, but on the list of things that you gave me all about yourself, which is very fascinating, you did mention that because you were stationed in various places in the country, in each kind of area you went to, you tried to find a church family where you went, and sometimes that was successful and sometimes it wasn't very successful.
That's right. Yeah.
So my question really is, when you're looking for a church or a church family, what are you looking for? What is important to you and Joan in a church family, and also what isn't?
Okay, I'll give an example straight away, which Joan reminded me of just the other day when we got married and moved initially to Forest Green in Surrey, very rural Surrey, at a lovely Anglican church. So we thought we'd go along and introduce ourselves. So we turned up on the first Sunday to be met by the vicar at the door, Joan pushing a pram with our eldest son in it, and ourselves all smartly turned up to go to church on Sunday. Only to be found out the vicar was at the door. So I'm sorry, the meeting's at the next church 5 miles away this Sunday. He never offered to take us there or give us any more information or anything of that nature. We just turned on our heels and went back home again. So we didn't feel particularly welcomed. We did go back again, but we did find we were only young, 20, 21, something like that, 22. And in all fairness, the rest of the congregation were considerably older than us and very staid in their way. It wasn't what we were looking for at all. Well, we were only there for a short while. We went from there to Chertsey, the other side of Surrey, much more urban than Forest Green had been. We tried to find fellowships there, but again, there was nothing that suited. But interestingly, when we went to Chobham and I'd asked for a house move, this particular police station had been renovated, and they were often looking for officers to go in, so I volunteered and was accepted, and we were living right next door to the vicarage. And one day there was a knock on the door, and the vicar's wife was there, to Mrs. Hammond, do you mind if I take your children to church, to the Sunday school? So Joan acquiesced, on they went, and we started going as well, and they were absolutely lovely. They were charming, and they were welcoming, and we were invited. We felt as though it was a place to go, and we were involved all the time we lived in Chobham. Joan in the choir, and myself when I could, duties permitting, because I was on CID at the time. Very long hours on CID, nothing uncommon to work 15 hours a day. So spare time was minimal, but we did get along from time to time with the services. So from there we went to, where did I got to? It was 1977, I think. We were looking for something different. And then there'd been a feature in the newspapers about a new church in Woke. I think it'd been there for some time actually, but they had a take-up in the congregation where they'd raised sufficient money to build a new building on the site where they had. And it sounded very interesting. They made it look exciting. I thought that's unusual for a church. Let's go along and have a look. And we'd never experienced churches living in the Spirit or anything of that nature at that time. And so that was really exciting for us. And we thought we were going to make the move. We were living in Horsell on the outskirts of Woking by then, moved from Chobham. And we started going in 1977, and we maintained a fellowship there. It was Baptist in origin, but very charismatic in the early days of the charismatic movement. And we thoroughly enjoyed it. Went along to Dale's Bibles a week, Dale's up in Yorkshire, and the Downs at Plumpton Racecourse. I know that other folk have been to those as well. And we
Let
went.
us know if you've been to any of these places.
I know a couple of people out there that said so, and we loved them. We thoroughly enjoyed it. Even on one occasion, we took a neighbour along. She lived 3 doors along from us, and we'd managed to get her very interested in the church way of life, and she even came along, stayed in our caravan awning for the week. I think it was very wet. If I remember, many of the Downs and Dales were, but it was exciting times, and I was actually out of the blue. I wasn't expecting it. The church eldership came to me one day, so phoned me up, said, "Can we come and see you, Alan?" I said, "No problem. We'd like to offer you a role as house group leader." And I had swept off my feet because I had no idea it was coming. So it had to be of the Lord, because I didn't initiate it in any way, shape or form. And I thoroughly enjoyed that. I was responsible for about 20, 25, 30 people, something of that nature. The fellowship at that time was about 500 or 600, so it's a very large fellowship. And I enjoyed very much being a house group leader. I only stopped doing it when we moved from Surrey to North Wales in 1988. And there were lots of reasons for the move. Can I go into those?
Yeah.
There was no one particular reason for moving. There were a lot of reasons. So there was no individual definitive one. But I did approach the pastor at the time of the church and said what I had in mind, what I felt the Lord was leading me to move away. And he said, "If that's what you want to do, Alan, then we'll give you our blessing." And so I applied to North Wales. Actually, I did research all 4 of the Welsh police forces. What I was after was a different way of policing to the English county style. Surrey was. I didn't want a city force. I did fancy Wales because it was going to be very different. I contacted all 4 of the Welsh forces, and I've decided to pursue it with both Dyfed-Powys and North Wales. But Dyfed-Powys wanted Welsh speakers and people who had a connection with their area. North Wales also wanted Welsh speakers and people with a connection, but they would entertain me, they said, if I was fully qualified to inspector, and I was. And on that basis, I made the application. And there was two interviews, both of them were motivational. Why did I want to come? The second was with the Chief Constable on his own, and he told me to my face, "I'll take you on, give you a chance." And so I moved to, in 1988, transferred to North Wales, and we immediately looked for fellowships there. And we'd been used to charismatic churches like the Coin and low Anglican churches. No Anglican churches, of course, because it's Wales. Yeah. So the Church of Wales, and they're very, very staid, unbelievably staid. Finding a charismatic church like we'd come from, it just didn't exist. So we were struggled. But we did eventually find a small house group meeting in Denby where we were living, and we were involved there. And then when we moved in 1990 into Rhyl, where Joan bought a residential home business, of which I had to get permission to be involved with, by the way, from the Chief Constable. Then we'd moved by then to a church in Prestatyn that was associated with the New Frontiers group, and they were under a church in Chester. And that was very good, and we enjoyed that. We enjoyed the fellowship of the people there. But a new pastor, or he wasn't actually a pastor, he was involved with the leadership. He came in and he had some really odd ideas which we didn't like and other people in the fellowship didn't like. That combined with Joan being full-time involved with the nursing home and me full-time with policing there, we fell away, and that fall away remained for quite some time. We still remained Christians in our fundamental beliefs, but outside of actively involved in a church fellowship.
And so, coming sort of full circle, what brought you to Wisbech and to King's Church?
Bringing us to, Samantha, who's listening in, was the reason. She'd moved to Cambridgeshire 4 years ago, in 2017. I'd retired by 2017 as well. I actually retired as a police officer in 1999, but I carried on working for the police in civilian roles right up until 2017, at 70 years of age. I think it's times I packed it in. But she'd moved, and we had no reason really to stay in North Wales. Our sons had remained in Surrey. She was here, so we started actively looking for property near to where she was.
North Wales is pretty far away from both.
It's a 5-hour plus drive, and every visit it always means an overnight visit, which means finding accommodation and inconveniencing family or whatever, or sometimes staying in hotels. So we said, well, if you're going to move, you've got to move by the time you're 70. And I was actually 72 then. I thought, well, if we're going to do it, we've got to do it now. It's no good leaving it till we're older. And so we started looking for a property. Joan had always liked the idea of an apartment close to a city or town centre. And I quite liked the idea as well. I could see the benefits of that. But there's no such thing there's no apartments in Whittlesey, or nothing that suited us anyway. And neither could we find a house or any sort of property, even though we looked for a couple of years. We were actively looking in Peterborough because that fitted the city centre bill, and we did know that there were big fellowships there as well, by the way. But in the end, we struggled to find a property, and we were in Whittlesey visiting Sam, and I was asked to go. Joan had become frustrated with our inability to find somewhere. Alan, you go and have a look. So I went up to the computer in Sam's office and started looking on Rightmove, I think, and I expanded the search engine to a bigger area, and it threw up an apartment here in Wisbech, and it was stunning, absolutely lovely. I said to Joan, you're going to have to come and look at this. So we rang the estate agents the following morning, and they said, well, we're going back to North Wales this afternoon, can we come today? They were resistant at first, it's today or never. And so we came and looked at it, and we put on it.
Wow.
And it all came off. It took 4 months. We knew nothing about Wisbech. Our sole motivation in coming to the area was to be close to Sam. 16 miles away, but better than 250.
Yes.
But what we also found was a really charming town with a great deal going for it in terms of history and architecture. And of great many things that have fascinated us since. We also found a fellowship. There's a strange link here, because I've also got a link with Matthew at the parish church.
Okay, yeah, Matthew Bradbury.
Yeah. He went to university with my sister and her husband. So my sister met her husband at university. Matthew was also there, and I was aware of that he was here in Wisbech. And I met him, of course, and I made a point of going and meeting him. We even went to a couple of services at St. Peter's, but I'm afraid it was like those old Anglican experiences. It really wasn't what we were looking for. And we came along to King's Church, and the fellowship was just exactly what we wanted. And we've been coming now for 2 years, and I have to say many people have been very welcoming. I know I have lots of folks still to meet, but those people that we have met have been absolutely delightful.
Yeah. No, great. There's a couple of things that sort of jumped out at me from your descriptions there. Was the welcoming nature of a church, and also how important invitation is. Yeah. And if you don't invite someone to church, or don't invite them to the group or whatever, the musical evening or whatever it is that's happening, if there's no invitation extended, it isn't going to happen.
Well, going back to the Anglican vicar, if it hadn't been there was no other church, so we persisted. We didn't carry on going because of the nature of it. But if there'd not been a welcome on that first day we turned up, we wouldn't be standing here having this conversation. So we'd have looked elsewhere. But it was welcoming, and we've continued to come back, and we love it. Simple as that.
Yeah. No, that's great. I've got a couple of questions
Okay.
on the chat for you. Jackie asks, how did you sustain your relationship with God when you fell away from a church fellowship?
I think we still had our fundamental beliefs. And as a police officer, you're always aware of Christian values. The values of being a police officer are very similar to Christian values, believe it or not. And so in that sense, I believe myself to be an honest person. Most police officers fundamentally are. That's why they join the service. So the values are there. But it was difficult at times. And for many periods we were in a barren desert, Christian-wise.
Sorry, I was trying to find Keith's question. I knew he'd asked it, and he's asked it again. He obviously is interested in the answer,
Go on,
and I couldn't find it. I was scrolling through, but I found it. Keith asks, has being a police officer ever conflicted with your Christian beliefs?
No, absolutely not. Because fundamentally we've got the same values. I've got the 10 Commandments written in front of me.
Okay.
And if you look through the 10 Commandments,
Yeah.
I'm only going to use 5 of them really, because of the other. That's
Go on.
the second one. You shall not murder. You shall not commit adultery. You shall not steal. You shall not bear false witness against your neighbour. You shall not covet. And there are others, of course, as well. And fundamentally, that's what policing is about. So the values of being a Christian are very, very similar to the values of being a police officer.
No, good.
So I hope that answers what Keith wants.
Great.
So for me, there's no conflict, none whatsoever. You deal with people with integrity. You deal with people with honesty. The police service is not just a discipline service, it's a self-discipline service. But you're dealing with other people's transgression a lot of the times, and therefore you're fundamentally aware of where you stand. Also, the police service is highly regulated, and it's highly accountable.
Yeah.
Very, very accountable. You have to have a not a reason for doing everything, but you do need to really document everything you do and give an explanation as to what you've done. When you're making big decisions, you've got to give the reasoning behind the decision you've made, and you've normally got to put it down on paper or on some electronic form so that it can be examined at a later date if necessary. And when you're giving authorisation for police pursuits, when you're giving authorisation for the issue of police firearms, and nobody in Britain, by the way, can use a firearm without getting permission first.
Yeah.
You can't just go off willy-nilly and shoot people.
Yeah, just as well.
Just as well.
That's
You need authority, and the authority is given by a control room inspector, and I held that role for 5 years. And so it does make you think about Christian values. The two are in parallel for me, and there's absolutely no conflict.
Great. As you know, my sister-in-law is a doctor.
I do.
And she really can't bring herself to watch TV programs that are medical TV programs because she just finds herself sitting there saying, no, that's not what it's called, that's not how you do it, oh, you're doing it all wrong, you're going to kill the person if you carry on doing it like that, and all the rest. So she just finds it best to avoid watching medical dramas and things on TV. So because the reason why I'm asking this is, for many of us watching and things, our experience of the actual police is very limited in reality. But we do watch loads of police programs on TV. So how does the reality of being a police officer match or not match the sort of portrayals and things we see on TV?
Two things. The fly-on-the-wall police programs, which are always highly edited, and being controlled by an editor who is very conscious of his audience. And the fiction, I'm afraid, is just exactly that. It's fiction. And let's leave it at that.
Yeah,
because I can't bear it.
Yeah.
And Joan knows this. She's probably cringing back there now. I can't watch it. I just cannot watch it.
Yeah. Yeah, I thought it would be a similar thing too.
By the way, in defence of Joan, she's the same with nursing programmes.
No, I understand. So
I'm just
what we've been describing tonight and all the values and everything else, it's really useful, really interesting, because quite a lot of times on the fictional stuff, of course, they're going for the sensational story drama thing, and so all of those really important values that you're talking about are just non-existent, and because it doesn't make a good story for the TV. So,
I mean, the top drama at the moment has been Line of Duty, is it?
Line of Duty, yeah.
And I've deliberately not been watching it. And I'm going to say this: the whole concept of police officers shooting one another with guns is just absolutely appalling and crass beyond belief. You've got to get permission to fire a police vehicle. So that just would not happen. Let's leave it there.
Yeah. So we've got about 10 minutes left, Alan. If anyone's got a question to ask Alan, please pop it in the chat now. Otherwise, we're going to run out of time to ask it. So do that, and whilst you're doing that, I do have a couple of other questions down here. I'm wondering, from your perspective, Alan, because as you say, you kind of new to Wisbech and newish to our church. You've been here for like 2 years, although 1 year of that's been in lockdown.
That's right.
So, we're going to take that into account. What, from your perspective, what would you like to see more of in our church, in our fellowship here in Wisbech?
That's a really interesting question. And can I have 4 minutes to think about that one?
Yeah.
I think we're still enjoying getting to know people. I love the fellowship. I can't think of anything that we're not unhappy with as things stand. But moving forward, I can't. I know that we got involved with the King's Lynn outreach in the town centre a while back. And I must admit, I was way out of my comfort zone with that. But I was listening 2-3 weeks ago when, I can't remember his name, the second interview. Chap came along, you've even used his interviews.
Tim Hall, yeah.
And he was talking about evangelism there. So maybe something along those lines. There always is a big need, isn't there, in any town, in any fellowship. I found myself doing that street evangelism very uncomfortable, but also something striking and worthwhile. Who knows? Maybe that will be.
Okay.
We've prayed several times. Why have we come to Wisbech? What do you want from us? Yeah. I mean, we're now almost in our mid-70s, but I'm not quite ready to retire yet. So who knows? Who knows?
Yeah. Okay. Great. I'm just seeing if there's any other questions. There aren't. There is a prayer request, and we will pray. In fact, we will pray for that now because it seems fairly important and urgent that we do. So James is just saying that Theo has just had another one of his seizures just now, where he stopped breathing again and is unconscious, but he is breathing again. So he's just asking if the church, if we can just pray for Theo. So let's just have a break from our conversation, and we're gonna pray for Theo now, and then we might come back with one more question before we finish off. So Jesus, we bring Theo to you. We just ask that you be with him and the rest of the family at this time. Lord, you know what's going on inside Theo's body, and we just ask that you be with him. May you calm things down. May you bring balance back to how things should be. We ask for healing of his body, and that these epileptic seizures will stop in Jesus' name. And we pray for the rest of the family as well at this time when someone who you love and care about is going through trauma like this. We do pray that you be with them and comfort them, and thank you that they can turn to you in times like this. We just ask that you be with Theo and James and the rest of the family. Amen. Amen. Great. Thanks for sharing that, James. Thank you. So one final question then. It might be a personal thing for yourself, or it might be sort of more wider reaching, I don't know. Is there something that the Holy Spirit has been talking to you about or showing you recently?
It's interesting you say that, because I want to give thanks to you and for Clive for inviting me along here today, because what it's done for me is maybe revisit both all of my Christian life and also my policing life as well. And when you go back over life like that, it does make you wonder where you've come from and where you're going and why were I even asked. So thank you for that opportunity, because by going back over all these sorts of things, it can make you reappraise what I've done and what I might be left to do going forward. On TV this afternoon was an 88-year-old who was thinking of taking on a dog. I'm not suggesting I'm going to do anything like that, but at 88 he was still extremely active. Yeah. So I've got at least 14 years on him yet. So who knows what the future holds. Yeah. So I'm hoping, yes, that this will point the way forward to something different in the future. So that, in a sense, what's the Holy Spirit leading me to? He'd led me back through my past. I hope that's going to be an invitation to do something in the future.
And I will be praying, and I'm sure others who are watching as well, because as you said, you and Joan have come to Wisbech, and you kind of, it's a great position to be in, where you're sort of saying, okay, Jesus, what now? Show us what to do, here we are. And so, well, I'll just pray now anyway. Lord, thank you for Joan and Alan, and we just ask that you lead them where you want them to be. Help them to hear your voice and to know what it is that you are calling them to do, calling them to be involved in whilst they're here in Wisbech at this time. Thank you, Lord, that every one of us has a significant role to play in your kingdom, no matter who we are. And thank you that Joan and Alan are loved by you, and that you have brought them here, and that they feel and know that you've brought them here. So we just ask that you show them the next step to what they can do for you whilst they're here. Thank you for them, and may you bless them. In Jesus' name.
Thank you.
Amen.
Amen. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much for agreeing to be with us tonight.
I've enjoyed it.
For the discussion. It's been really interesting, really good to get to know you a bit better and about the background and history and everything. Yeah, really good, really good. Thank you so much for joining us this evening as well. And thank you for all the comments on the live chat. And we do hope to see you again next week. There will be another Friday conversation happening at 7:30 on Friday. Don't forget, we have Sunday mornings at 10:30. We've got a couple of Sunday morning live streams left before we start meeting in person at the end of May. So do tune in for that on Sunday at 10:30. But other than that, thank you very much for watching. Thank you, Alan, for
Thank you for inviting
us. And we will say goodbye and good night.
Good night.
It's our encouragement when things are tough to know that Jesus is reigning. He is King. He is in control of history from beginning to end. And therefore, as his disciples, we need to be looking up, looking beyond what we immediately see to what is actually there behind the curtain. The one who was dead and is now alive forevermore, because of course that is how he won his victory. That is why the ascended, glorified man is on the throne,